Colombia and Latin America rejoices after Gustavo Petro and Francia Márquez's victory as the new president and vice president of the country. The Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, CONAIE, ratified the continuity of the national strike while announcing mobilizations in all provinces of the country. The government of Russia reported the neutralization of 50 Ukrainian generals after executing a high-precision missile attack on a command post in the Dnipropetrovsk region. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. In a first time for Colombia, leftist candidate Gustavo Petro was elected president of the country with more than 11 million votes. With 100% of the votes counted, the historical pact formula obtained the victory in the presidential runoff with 50.44% of the valid votes. On the other hand, businessperson Rodolfo Hernández, running for the League of Anti-Corruption Rulers, obtained 47.31% of the votes. This triumph means a change in the history of the country. According to the official bulletin, more than 22,600,000 Colombians went to the polls, which represents more than 58.09% of the electoral roll.
Participación electoral de este siglo, ya que un 58% de los 39 millones de colombianos habilitados para votar fueron a las urnas.
And Colombia is living historical days as for the first time a leftist candidate assumed the presidency of the country, and also for the first time a social activist and representative of Colombia's minorities is now the vice president of that South American nation. To know more on how Colombian people experience this moment, we now contact with our special envoy Natalia Margarita. Hello, Natalia.
Hi, Gladys.
So, Natalia, what can you say to us? What could you tell to us about last night? Because we know it was a night of results, the outcome of these elections. We saw people rejoicing in the Movistar Arena with Petro and with Francia Márquez. But what can you say to us about the streets? How this was living in the people's crowds, in the streets, in the neighborhoods? What you saw?
Well, celebrations took place all over the night until very, very late hours of yesterday night. You could see in the streets here in Bogota a small, medium, large groups of people taking to the streets, celebrating. Also, it is important to highlight, Gladys, that there was a lot of diversity reflected in the streets of the country, meaning groups of Jewish people, but also indigenous people that came from the regions of Colombia to Bogota to await for the results and finally celebrate this victory of the first leftist president in the history of Colombia. So you definitely could see that cultural diversity of Colombia reflected yesterday in the streets. The people also from Afro-descendants, for instance, were here also celebrating not just Gustavo Petro victory, but also Francia Márquez, that was elected as vice president, and that is an Afro-descendant woman from one of the most affected regions by the armed conflict here in Colombia, that is Cauca department. Also, I would like to tell you that lots of people were commemorating three candidates that were also from the left wing, and they were murdered during the 80s and the 90s. Lots of people were also saying in the streets that this is a result of those processes, social processes here in Colombia, where lots of people were murdered by paramilitary groups and also by the state. They were, again, I insist, they were honoring the memory of those who were murdered. And specifically regarding these three left-wing candidates that are Bernardo Jaramillo, Jaime Pardo Leal, and Carlos Pizarro, as I said before, they were candidates from the left wing here in Colombia with a high possibility of getting to the presidency, but they were murdered during the 80s and the 90s. Also, today I can tell you that there is an ambience also of lots of calm and tranquility here in Colombia, as yesterday all different sectors, political and social sectors here in Colombia, acknowledge the results and acknowledge the victory of Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. Even those extreme right-wing sectors already acknowledge these results of the presidential election. And this is something that is giving lots of calm and tranquility in the ambience. No one is talking about electoral fraud. Everyone, I insist, have acknowledged the results since yesterday. So this is also something that gives calm. And finally, I would also like to highlight something that many sectors have been highlighting here in Colombia, and is the fact of the very, very high participation of citizens here in Colombia yesterday. A little bit more than 22 million of Colombians went to the polls. This means that 58% of the 39 millions of Colombians that were eligible to vote. And this is a historical participation. In no other presidential elections in Colombian history, we have had this high level of participation. So definitely what we can say is that yesterday it was a very good day for democracy here in Colombia, Gladys.
Yes, indeed. Natalia, you were mentioning something really, really important, and I think is vital to explain this process in Colombia. You were mentioning the 3 candidates of the left that were murdered in their campaign time, and also you were talking about how the youth and how the minorities were gathering to celebrate together this victory of Petro and Francia Marquez. But in any case, we remember that last year that same youth was protesting against Iván Duque's policies. That same youth that saw Lucas Villa being murdered in the streets of Colombia, and also the youth that was making up the front line of the protest, primera línea, as it's known in Spanish. So what can you say? Is this a victory of the youth? Is this a victory of young people? Is young people betting their hopes and better their dreams in Francia Marquez and Gustavo Petro?
This is a victory of all the youth included, of course, but all different sectors, Gladys, here that have never seen themselves represented in any other government in the history of Colombia. This is definitely a political change here in Colombia. We have never had a progressive or left-leaning government here, and there have been lots of sectors here excluded of all government plans that we had before. I would like to highlight the youth, as you said, and we could see yesterday lots of young people that are seeing with hope this new possibility that we're starting this year with this new government, but also indigenous sectors. This was really important. We have here in the Indigenous Guard of the Cauca Department, and yesterday in the Movistar Arena, they came to celebrate and to accompany both Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez in this first discourse after being elected, but also the Afro-descendants, but also the poor, but also those people that live in all those areas that have been historically abandoned by Colombian state. We have to remember that on most of the rural areas of Colombia, they don't have access to public education, they don't have access to public health care, they don't have really anything to guarantee the minimum conditions to live with dignity here in Colombia. And all those sectors are now seeing the possibility of finally having their own voice and being taken into account in this new government that we start. And as you said also, the process that we have experienced during last year with this massive protest, social protest here in Colombia, that were protesting, of course, against this government, the current government of Iván Duque, but in general, this was a protest against all these governments, because let's remember that before Iván Duque, we have since 2002, basically, we have had all the first Álvaro Uribe Vélez as a president, but secondly, all the candidates that he have choose to be the successors of this political movement of Uribe. And basically what people were protesting and the youth were protesting last year was against all these traditions of governance here in Colombia, not just Iván Duque, but all the governments we have had, specifically also since 2002 with Álvaro Uribe Vélez. So I could tell you what I saw yesterday really in the streets was basically lots of hope. This is how I would resume the mood in the streets, hope, and especially hope among the youth and among the poor and among all social excluded sectors.
Yes, Natalia. So if you have hope, I congratulate you, and I congratulate all the people that voted for Petro and now is just celebrating.
Thank you.
So thank you, Natalia, for this report, and we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. The Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, CONAIE, ratified the continuity of the national strike while announcing mobilizations in all provinces of the country. The national strike in Ecuador continues for the 8th consecutive day, with at least 6 sectors closed in the capital, Quito, all in spite of the fact that the government declared a state of exception in the provinces of Pichincha, Cotopaxi, and Imbabura. The president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities, Leonidas Issa, reiterated that the measure will be maintained indefinitely until the 10 demands that have been presented to the national government are clarified and met. In this sense, the Ecuadorian parliament will evaluate this Monday the state of exception declared by the President Guillermo Lasso a week ago. The session was called on the request of 72 of the 137 parliamentarians who seek to determine the pertinence of the measure in the country. And the protests against the government of President Guillermo Lasso reached their 8th day and intend to show muscle this Monday in Quito, Ecuador's capital. The Calderon parish, one of the most populated in the region, reports at this time strong mobilizations and in some areas violent repression. After considering the offers of the national executive as derisory, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, the CONAIE, called for a mobilization towards Quito that will enter through this populous parish. Community media and popular platforms share through their social networks the multitudinous entry of indigenous organizations from the north of the country, while security forces harass the community with gas and gunfire. And we have more updates on Ecuador protests. On Sunday, police forces raided the Ecuadorian culture center Casa de Cultura Benjamín Carrión in Quito, the capital of the country. Under President Guillermo Lasso's orders on Sunday night, agents of the National Police took the premises due to an alleged complaint of stockpiling explosive material and because from this point on it will be used as officers' barracks in the framework of the protests. According to the Attorney General's office, an anonymous call was received, supposedly alerting them of the existence in the premises of a group of 30 people, nationals and foreigners, that were storing war material, such as explosives and handmade weapons. This was denounced as a smear campaign to criminalize the demonstrations and justify the country's militarization. We move on to other topics. On Sunday, Spain's opposition People's Party won an absolute majority on Andalusia's regional elections, boosting the new conservative leader's odds for the national elections in late 2023. The Conservative Popular Party, the PP, won 58 seats in the 109-seat Andalusian Regional Parliament, which will allow it to govern alone in Spain's most populous region. The Socialists captured 30 seats, its worst-ever result in the region, which is home to some 8.5 million people. The Socialist Party had governed Andalusia without interruption since 1982, when the region government was established. This is the Pedro Sánchez Party's third consecutive regional election loss to the PP after votes in Madrid in May 2021 and Castilla y León in February. French President Emmanuel Macron lost his absolute majority in Congress after the second round of legislative elections held in the country on Sunday. According to official results, President Emmanuel Macron's political alliance together won 245 seats in the Congress. The figure is 44 seats less than the number needed to obtain an absolute majority. The second place went to the leftist coalition New Popular Ecological and Social Union, which, after winning 131 seats, indicated that it will present a motion of censure against the government in early July. Meanwhile, the third place went to the Marine Le Pen National Group and Organization, which won 89 representatives. These results oblige the French president to look for alliances within the parliament to be able to approve the laws he considered necessary. Members of the executive indicated that the voice of the people must be heard. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The government of Russia reported the neutralization of 50 Ukrainian generals after executing a high-precision missile attack on a command post in the Dnipropetrovsk region. According to Russia's Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov, the operation took place on Saturday as a meeting of the command of the Operational Strategic Group of the Alexandria troops was being held. The meeting was attended by generals and officers of the Ukrainian army, specifically of units and airborne troops operating in the southern regions of Zaporizhia and Mykolaiv. Konashenkov reported another caliber attack which destroyed a factory in Mykolaiv, a dozen 155mm Howitzer guns, and about 20 armored vehicles recently delivered to Kiev by the United States. And a few hours ago, the self-proclaimed authorities of Lugansk in eastern Ukraine declared full control of the Toshkiva town near Severodonetsk. So-called Lugansk Deputy Interior Minister Vitaly Virzinchev has declared the liberation and denazification of the entire area. Also, the Joint Ceasefire Control and Coordination Center confirmed that there are more than 40 damaged buildings in Lugansk. Schools, kindergartens, stores and residential buildings have been targeted by tactical Tokcha-U missiles fired by Ukrainian forces. A local cultural center and the Department of Vital Infrastructure were also partially destroyed. Hundreds of people demonstrated in Tunisia on Sunday in a second day of protest against a constitutional referendum called by the president Kais Saied that his opponents said will cement his hold on power. The demonstration was organized by the Salvation Front, a coalition including the moderate Islamist Ennahda, the largest party in the parliament that Saied dissolved in March. It followed a similar protest on Saturday called by the Free Constitutional Party over the referendum, and a strike on Thursday by a powerful labor union over government economic reform plans, which brought much of the country to a standstill. Said's move heightened accusations at home and abroad that he has consolidated one-man rule after assuming executive powers last summer and setting aside the 2014 constitution to rule by decree.
We are here under one title, which is to stand against the coup and for the restoration of all democracy, which was betrayed by Kais Saied. This is the essence of our system. Any addition to that from solutions and deception under the title of a referendum or a constitution or elections is meaningless.
In Palestine, government officials called to stop Israel's expansionist and colonization policy. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry denounced through a statement that the recent wave of attacks against the inhabitants of the West Bank is part of a strategy of Tel Aviv that seeks to raise the tension to create a state of chaos and instability in order to push forward its expansionist policy. The Foreign Ministry considered that these actions are part of Israel's race against time to permanently close the door to any opportunity to generate a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. The Foreign Ministry urged the international community to assume its legal and moral responsibilities to stop the neighboring country's offensive. In Israel, members of education union and various sectors of society protested this Sunday against salary conditions. More than 2 million students started classes at 10 a.m. local time due to the partial protest of educators. Teachers claim that salaries are too low. According to the Daily Israel Hayom this Sunday, several police officers are protesting for the same reason. The press claims that some 400 police officers have left the institution since the beginning of 2022. Bus drivers from the General Workers Federation will also stop work tomorrow for 2 hours to denounce their low salaries. Jerusalem, Netanya, and Ashdod, among others, will be some of the cities affected by the strike. And TeleSUR expands its signal with new satellite parameters. Since more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are being heard in other farther away nations. These parameters are in place since June 1st in Latin America and the Caribbean, both in English and Spanish, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. This news multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. So we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.